When residents of Khersonskaya Street discovered the identity of the Bitsa Park Maniac in 2006, they were shocked. They couldn't comprehend the idea that their neighbour, Alexander Pichushkin, who they described as reserved, sensitive and polite, was a man capable of the murder of over 40 individuals over the span of 5 years. One neighbour, a 70-year-old woman named Svetlana, recalled, "He called me Auntie Sveta. He loved animals and was inconsolable if a pet died. For 40 years I lived in the same house as a maniac." Pichushkin's mother felt much the same way. She hadn't felt even an inkling that her son was the man that the press was now calling the Chessboard Killer. So who exactly is Alexander Pichushkin? And how did he get away with his crimes for so long? In this documentary, we aim to answer this question and more as we explore the life and crimes of the Chessboard Killer. Alexander Yurovich Pichushkin was born on April 9, 1974, in Mytishy, Moscow. His father, also named Alexander, appears to have abandoned the family early on in his children's lives, as there is no information available on him, nor any details about when or why he left. Pichushkin and his younger half-sister, Katya, were raised by their mother, Natasha. They lived together at 2 Khersonskaya Street in Moscow, in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 5th floor. Later, as an adult, Katya would move her husband, also named Alexander, into the family home, along with the couple's son. The building was just a 6-minute walk from Bitsa Park, also known as Bitsa Park, one of Moscow's largest natural parks, covering 18 square kilometers. It boasts sprawling green hills, dense forestry, streams and clearings. In the summer, it is the perfect location for a family picnic, and in the winter, cross-country skiers make the most of the landscape. The park is surrounded by thousands of people living in rustling apartment blocks that were built in 1963, and were the Soviet Union's first large-scale public housing project. In the family's apartment, Pichushkin slept on the sofa in the first bedroom, which doubled as a living room. He was a relatively normal and sociable child, up until he was 4 years old. At this point, his mother Natasha believes a head injury contributed to his change in behaviour. Pichushkin reportedly fell off a swing backwards and was struck in the head by the seat as it swung back again. Experts have suggested that this damaged Pichushkin's frontal cortex, which would lead to poor impulse regulation and displays of aggression. Since he was only a young child at the time, the damage may have been even worse, as his skull was not fully developed to provide protection in the way that an adult would. After this, Pichushkin became more hostile and impulsive, although neighbours said they never had any trouble with him, and he was always well-mannered. Still, Natasha felt that her son needed extra care, so she moved him from a mainstream school to one that catered to children with learning disabilities. While in mainstream education, Pichushkin was harassed and abused by the other children on a daily basis. He was physically and verbally bullied and labelled that retard. His abuse only served to intensify the young boy's aggression. Although little is known about the rest of Pichushkin's upbringing, an article in The Guardian from 2007 notes that he was close to his maternal grandfather, whom he spent some time living with. It was reported his grandfather who introduced him to chess. Pichushkin excelled at playing the game and was recognized by his father figure as being much more intelligent than anybody else realized. He began to play games against elderly men who played publicly in Bitsa Park and was largely considered an outstanding player. Pichushkin's mother believes the sudden death of his grandfather in his adolescence contributed to his downfall. A Russian psychologist, named Mikhail Vinogradov, suggested that the abrupt emotional blow led to him being angry at his grandfather for abandoning him, and in retaliation he began to kill. The chessboard killer himself has stated that he had a difficult life. After his grandfather passed away, he would often walk around Bitsa Park with his dog and sank into depression when the canine passed away. Pichushkin's elderly neighbour, Svetlana, also once found him in tears in the stairwell of the apartment block, grieving for his deceased cat. Around the time of his grandfather's demise, Pichushkin reportedly began to develop a taste for alcohol, specifically vodka. This would soon become one of the tools he relied on most as he began to kill. Pichushkin committed his first murder when he was 18 years old. On July 27, 1992, he arranged to meet a friend and classmate named Mikhail Odachuk in Bitsa Park. Mikhail was trusted so deeply by Pichushkin that he had revealed his desire to kill him. He told Mikhail that he wanted to hatch a plan to commit murder, and Mikhail agreed and went along with this idea. However, when the pair met in the park to discuss the matter, he got cold feet, or perhaps he didn't realize that Pichushkin was serious about committing crimes. Pichushkin, however, was not happy that his friend wanted to bail out of the plan. Feeling like he'd been led on and subsequently let down, he pulled a hammer from his bag and repeatedly hit his friend on the head. Mikhail suffered 20 blows during the attack and died at the scene. Once his body went limp, Pichushkin deposited it by the sewer system that ran through the park before returning to his mother's apartment. The following day, Mikhail's body was discovered. Had the police in Russia carried out their due diligence, this might have been the end of Pichushkin's story. But unfortunately, this was just the beginning of a long string of failures that showed the authorities as ignorant and incompetent, allowing Pichushkin to get away without facing any consequences for years, in which he brutally murdered dozens of innocent victims. The Muscovite police force ran the investigation into Mikhail's demise, which was ruled a homicide. The identity of the corpse was quickly established, and witnesses soon came forward, stating that they'd seen 18-year-old Mikhail with Pichushkin walking in the direction of the park, shortly before he was believed to have died. Pichushkin was arrested at his residence 2 days after the crime had been committed. He was taken in for questioning and interrogated about his alibi. The killer claimed that he had, in fact, been with Mikhail in the park, but that he'd left him there to go and meet up with his sister and mother. After being interviewed for several hours, Pichushkin was released without charge. The police had no evidence tying the 18-year-old to the death of his classmate, something which would become a regular occurrence in many of his other crimes. Pichushkin's next murder occurred in September 1992 when he was romantically rejected by his neighbour, an 18-year-old named Olga. She reportedly told him that she wasn't interested as she already had a boyfriend. Angry at this refusal, Pichushkin set his sights on Olga's boyfriend, a young man named Sergei. Shortly afterwards, Sergei turned up dead outside of his apartment. It's generally believed that Pichushkin went to his apartment and pushed the young man out of a window where he fell to his death. Sergei's death, however, was ruled a suicide. In 2002, Olga's body was also reportedly discovered in Bitsa Park. Pichushkin is believed to be responsible for her murder. Following his first two murders, Pichushkin stopped killing for almost a decade. It has been suggested that he stopped committing crimes because he was afraid of getting caught and being handed the death penalty. In October of 1992, the same month Pichushkin stopped killing, Russia's most notorious serial killer, Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Ripper, was sentenced to death. Chikatilo was known for killing children and young women over a 12-year period and cannibalizing their remains. He was convicted of killing 52 individuals. There was much media speculation following Pichushkin's capture that he wanted to outdo Chikatilo, aiming to rise to infamy by killing more people than the Rostov Ripper had. Pichushkin resumed killing in 2001, 9 years after the murders of Sergei and Mikhail. By this time, the Chessboard Killer was 27 years old and working stacking shelves at a Moscow supermarket. On May 21st, Pichushkin was playing chess with a 52-year-old man named Yevgeny Pronin in Bitsa Park. Following their game, the 27-year-old invited Yevgeny to join him on a walk to the grave of his deceased dog, presumably the one that passed away in his teen years. Yevgeny agreed, and the pair walked to an isolated area of the park, where Pichushkin produced a bottle of vodka from his bag and offered the elder man a drink. They toasted to the deceased canine and appeared merry until Pichushkin struck Yevgeny over the back of the head. Once the older man was dead, his body was thrown into a nearby well. Pichushkin quickly established an MO. He would often target elderly men in Bitsa Park, especially those who were homeless, and would gain their trust by conversing with them and offering them a drink of vodka. As the victims let down their guard, Pichushkin would strike. He killed by blunt force trauma and was known to use a wrench and a hammer, as well as a metal pipe or rod. He struck his victims from behind to take them by surprise and to avoid spilling blood on his clothing, and would never kill his victims in one blow, stating that he wanted them to know what was happening. With some of his victims, Pichushkin was known to shove shattered glass shards from the vodka bottle into the wounds, and in one instance, the body of a woman was found with many stakes hammered into her skull and eyes. He very rarely killed women, and only had around 3 female victims, while the youngest known victim was a 9-year-old boy. Pichushkin also alleged that he sometimes pushed his victims into a sewage canal in the park, where they would drown, and he frequently pushed others down to a well to die after he'd already struck them in the head. Some bodies would turn up 5 miles away at a wasteland treatment center, but others were never recovered. At least 13 corpses are believed to be stuck in the park's sewage system. Pichushkin would later state, "I liked the sound of a skull splitting" when discussing his weapons of choice. During this period in Russia, loved ones of missing family members had to wait 3 days before they could file a missing report. Furthermore, the police force was known for bribery and alcohol abuse, and often made no progress on any of the cases that came their way. In the 2 months following the murder of Yevgeny Pronin, Pichushkin claimed the lives of 9 more victims. His 11th target in this specific spree was Viktor Volkov, who vanished on July 21st. Over the subsequent autumn and winter months, things slowed down for Pichushkin. He behaved much less erratically, killing around 5 individuals during this time. On February 23, 2002, Pichushkin attempted to murder a pregnant woman named Maria Veresheva, whom he'd met at a metro station and who was struggling financially. He lured her with the promise of helping her make money. Pichushkin then struck Maria in the head and pushed her down a well, but miraculously, after being trapped for 20 hours, she was able to climb out by herself. She subsequently went to the hospital to be treated for her wounds, where she reported the assault to the local police. The authorities, however, were disinterested in examining the case. The officer Maria spoke with asked for her registration papers, and during this time, millions of people lived in Moscow quasi-legally, as there was very little in the way of employment outside the city. When Maria confessed that she did not have the proper documentation, the officer told her that the police would overlook her illegal habitation if she stayed quiet about the attempt on her life. Faced with no other options, Maria agreed. While this officer was later jailed for incompetence, Maria struggled to live a normal life after the attack. Her boyfriend, whose baby she was carrying, broke off their relationship, and she was forced to give her baby up for adoption. To make matters worse, while she was out running errands, Maria spotted Pichushkin, who also saw her. In fear, she ran back to her apartment, packed a suitcase and fled, terrified that he would come back to finish off the job he had started that winter. So, still free to kill, Pichushkin took another 3 lives over the course of the next 2 weeks. He then encountered Mikhail Lobov, a 13-year-old boy. It's unclear where the two met, and thought to be unlikely that they knew each other prior to the crime. It has been suggested that the pair met on Kakhovka Prospect, near the metro station, as young teenagers liked to hang out there and were often seen in leather jackets drinking vodka among the kiosks. Pichushkin persuaded Mikhail to go for a walk with him in the park, The pair shared cigarettes and appeared to be having a good time until Pichushkin struck. He bashed the 13-year-old over the head and shoved him down a well. But little did the killer know that Mikhail's leather jacket snagged on a piece of metal sticking out of the inside wall of the well, which allowed him to climb back out and escape to safety. As Maria had, Mikhail ran to tell the police officer about what had happened, but was told simply to go home. Again, the authorities were not interested in stories from women and children about a man who'd supposedly tried to kill them. A week later, Mikhail saw Pichushkin at the metro station, and much like Maria, had become distraught. He began screaming and ran to an officer who stood patrolling outside the station. He shouted and pointed, begging for the police to do something, but once more, he was brushed aside and told to leave. In November of 2005, a 63-year-old ex-police officer named Nikolai Zakharchenko turned up dead in Bitsa Park. He was the first victim of Pichushkin's, who, having gone missing, had turned up dead and was found beyond any doubt to have been the victim of a homicide. He was also the killer's 41st victim. It was only now, after 40 other killings, that the Russian authorities realized that they had a problem, and a big one at that. Detectives at the Interior Ministry, local police, and the Prospector General's office finally sat up and took notice. They had a serial killer on their hands. It seems that Pichushkin spent much of his time torn between not wanting to get caught, but wanting everyone to know that he was the mastermind behind all of the callous killings, disappearances, and assaults. Like many serial killers, he craved notoriety. One unverified story claims that in late 2001 or early 2002, Pichushkin entered a police station and announced that he regularly murdered people, adding, "Because that is what I do." However, the police laughed the 27-year-old out of the station. They branded him a drunk and told him to go home. 2 months before Nikolai's body was found, Pichushkin made the decision to stop disposing of bodies and start leaving them out in the open. His ego was growing, and his need to be hailed as a cold-blooded killer was deepening. Around this time, as Pichushkin's lust for infamy grew, and the Russian authorities established that there was a serial killer in their midst, a news report on the TV talked about the Bitsa Park killer. Pichushkin's sister, Katya, reportedly said, "This madman, he's so fascinating, who is he?" Pichushkin had to restrain himself from coming clean, as he desperately wanted to reveal everything. As the search for the Bitsa Park Maniac, as the media had dubbed him, intensified, Pichushkin grew more and more reckless, and when he left the bodies out, he made sure that they would be found. One victim was discovered by a stream in the park. They had been dead for 2 days, and their remains had been picked up by wild dogs. The doctor who found the body saw bones in the mouths of the wild creatures. With the revelation that a serial killer was among them, residents became fearful, and police, both uniformed and plainclothed, patrolled the park 24/7. They spoke with everyone they crossed paths with, and compiled sketches of potential suspects. In March of 2006, investigators believed they'd cracked the case when they were threatened by a man wielding a knife. They shot the man and arrested him, but while he was locked up, 2 more people turned up dead. Pichushkin would later admit to knowing about this arrest. It pleased him to have the upper hand. He'd also been stopped by the police on several different occasions, so that his ID documents could be examined. Since he was well dressed and clean cut, he was never considered a suspicious individual. On June 14, 2006, Pichushkin invited a co-worker, a 36-year-old mother named Marina Moskalyeva, out for a walk. She reportedly was a little hesitant to go, but eventually agreed. However, noticing the gut feeling she had about the now 33-year-old, she decided to leave a note for her son, which stated she'd gone out with Pichushkin. She included her co-worker's full name and phone number in the note. Pichushkin was aware that Maria had left the note, yet it seemed that he had finally reached a point where he could no longer restrain himself. He wanted to kill her, and he wanted it to be known. He knew that the note would make him the prime suspect in the murder, but acted anyway. Later that night, Marina's body was discovered in the park, bearing all the hallmarks of the Bitsa Park Maniac. When her son saw the news report about the remains, he called his father, who in turn called the police. Not only did the note cause investigators to suspect Pichushkin, but they also found tickets for the metro in Marina's pocket. When they looked at CCTV footage, detectives spotted the pair waiting on the platform just hours before Marina's estimated time of death. 2 days after the murder, on June 16th at close to midnight, there was a knock on the door of the apartment Pichushkin shared with his family. His mother slowly opened the door, and a stream of uniformed men pushed past her down the narrow corridor and to the first bedroom. Riot police, armed with automatic rifles, told Natasha that they needed to speak with her son about some recent burglaries. It wasn't until Pichushkin, who came willingly, was removed from the home, that they revealed that he was suspected of being involved with multiple murders. Natasha was so shocked that she couldn't speak. She had called her son brave and claimed he never lied. How could her little boy, who had a fish tank and a cat named Mersik, be a cold-blooded killer? The TV adaptation of Alexandre Dumas's Countess of Montsoreau was his favourite show. They would watch it together. Pichushkin would later admit in court that sometimes he had to cut his murders short so that he could go home and clean himself up in time for their weekly viewing. Natasha told GQ, "I know now that I raised my son very poorly. I can't say what I did wrong. I just tried to raise him like a normal mother. I think I didn't know my son very well." As Natasha continued to soak up what she was being told, uniformed officers, detectives, and forensic specialists turned the family home upside down. Like his mother, Pichushkin was adamant that he never lied, and yet he lied about killing Marina. Before calling his father, Marina's son called Pichushkin, who told him that he hadn't seen his mother in 2 months. This was odd, considering the pair worked together most days. He then claimed that he was busy and hung up the phone. Of his capture, Pichushkin stated, "I burnt myself, so there's no need for the cops to take credit for catching me. I'm a professional." It seems clear from his actions that the killer felt that if he was going to get caught, it would be on his terms. Detectives spent a long time questioning Pichushkin. When asked why he murdered his victims in the park, he replied, "Have you ever tried killing someone on the street in broad daylight?" By this point, the police had only gathered 13 of the killer's victims, which meant it came as a shock to them when Pichushkin told them the true number. He claimed to have killed 63 people. One of the main investigators who interviewed the chessboard killer stated, "He wanted to talk. All maniacs want to talk." He then added, "It made him feel important. I told him I admired him, and he liked that, and then he opened up. It was very important for Pichushkin that people think he was a hero, so I made him feel like a hero." Over the course of months, the police piled Pichushkin with food, cigarettes, and compliments. And in the end, they discovered that he was not quite the mustache-twirling Hollywood-style villain they had expected. Instead, they felt he was a hollow man, a normal man who didn't fit into any psychological profile neatly. He had no strong opinions about anything, not beauty, not art, not politics, not religion. He had no preferences or ideas about any of these topics. The press dubbed him the Chessboard Killer, as he was known to play the game, and the police allegedly found a chessboard in his apartment, on which he had recorded his murders. 1 kill equaled 1 square. It's unclear if the police found any such thing, however. Furthermore, investigators who worked on the case described this moniker as misleading because it suggests that Pichushkin would have stopped killing at 64 deaths when there was no evidence of this. Pichushkin himself stated, "If they hadn't caught me, I would never have stopped, never. They saved a lot of lives by catching me." Pichushkin, once apprehended, led the police to the scenes of many of his crimes in the park and demonstrated a keen recollection of how the murders were carried out. He was filmed reenacting them in great detail, which was common for Russian investigations at the time, and even gave them the hammer he used in several of the crimes. On February 14, 2008, Pichushkin was put on trial for his crimes at the newly renovated Supreme Court of Russia. He was placed in a glass box for his own protection, and was seen throughout the trial looking amused, bored, and sometimes very angry. When responding to questions and giving comments, he never looked directly at the video camera in his cell. Notably, his trial had a jury and was open to the public, neither of which were common in Russia at the time. Pichushkin revealed a lot during his trial. When he was asked about why he killed, he responded with, "You see, life for me is like life without food for you, a craving. I felt like the father of those people. After all, I opened the door to another world for them. I released them into a new life." He also stated, "I sent Mikhail to heaven. The closer a person is to you and the better you know them, the more pleasurable it is to kill them. In all the cases, I killed for only one reason. I killed in order to live, because when you kill, you want to live." After he was incarcerated, Pichushkin admitted that each killing brought him colossal pleasure. Similarly, while on trial, he claimed that one's first murder is like first love, and that he sometimes ejaculated when he killed. At the opening of the trial, the prosecution stated that according to his own testimony, Pichushkin hoped to surpass the record of Andrei Chikatilo and dreamed of going down in history. Doctors from Chessboard Center in Moscow, Russia's most respected psychiatric clinic, pronounced Pichushkin sane and noted that he never had any documented mental health issues and has average intelligence. On October 24, 2008, Pichushkin was found guilty of 48 murders. During the trial, he insisted that he'd killed 63 people, and he wanted to be recognized for that. However, the prosecution and investigators only had evidence which tied him to 48 slayings, something which he complained about. He believed if he had 63 slayings attributed to him, then he would have the title of Russia's most infamous killer. Pichushkin was sentenced to life in prison, with the first 15 years being spent in solitary confinement. In late 2007, he appealed his sentence, claiming it was too harsh, and asking for a reduction of 25 years. However, his appeal was declined. His lawyer had reportedly tried to warn him his appeal wouldn't work, but Pichushkin insisted. He was sent to spend his solitary confinement sentence at Polar Owl, a Russian prison located on the bank of the Sob River. It is one of 7 Supermax corrective labor colonies operated by the Federal Penitentiary Service for Russian convicts who are sentenced to life behind bars. Pichushkin is currently 48 and is still incarcerated. Almost all prisoners refuse to share a cell with him, terrified of being brutally murdered in the middle of the night. The serial killer describes prison as dull and considers the idea of people being jailed for life unnatural. To this day, Pichushkin claims that he killed because he had no other choice. Yet when asked if he supports the death penalty, he responded with, "The death penalty is murder. I am always against murder." Even after 15 years behind bars, Pichushkin seems to take no accountability for his actions. He largely blames society for his actions, stating, "If my childhood and youth were corrected, then the murders would not have to be committed as unnecessary. It's not about the family. My family was basically normal, although there were difficulties, but society crippled me." Furthermore, when he was asked if he had any remorse for what he had done, all the lives he'd taken, all the families he'd robbed of husbands, brothers and granddads, he replied, "No remorse, I tell you. If they let me out now, the first thing I would do is kill a couple of people to relieve stress, rape a woman, drink vodka." Disturbingly, Pichushkin appears to be a popular inmate with some women. He claims that 80 women have written to him since 2008. In 2016, he proposed to a woman he'd been corresponding with, named either Natalia or Natasha. While she allegedly accepted the proposal, the couple were not allowed to marry. Pichushkin claims that the prison system barred the pair from communicating any further, but a Moscow-based newspaper, MKRU, stated that they checked out these allegations and found that the letters to Pichushkin's bride-to-be were being delivered. She simply wasn't responding. MKRU suggests that the bride had been fabricated by a reporter posing as her because the couple had never met in person. He admitted that he doesn't know what she looks like, and yet a TV report which first discussed the story claimed she got on the train every week to visit him. While Pichushkin is not as well known outside of Russia as his American and British counterparts like Ted Bundy and Peter Sutcliffe, he is perhaps even more terrifying in that he was able to get away with so much blood on his hands for so long, taking life after life, and all the while he seemed to feel nothing. not a speck of guilt or sadness for what he had done. Without further information on what growing up was like for Pichushkin, it's difficult to determine what exactly brought on this violent spree that spanned several years. But from what we've learned through this documentary, it seems that he enjoyed power, craved infamy, and wanted to essentially be the country's best serial killer. For the information we have available to us, it almost seems like Pichushkin was born to kill.